holy flip balls.
Storytelling for an audience member should not be a passive experience.
When you have a bittersweet ending, you immediately have contrast.
Imagining David partway through that show coming to see me as a therapist.
Welcome everybody to episode 4 of Frame of Mind. My name is Jordan. I'm your filmmaker.
My name is Curtis. I'm your psychotherapist.
And Curtis, holy flip balls. I just watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners. And
Yeah, after I recommended it
9 months ago.
Yeah.
I'm honestly mad at myself that I didn't watch it sooner. Like genuinely upset. It's so good.
It is, I think, far and away one of my favorite shows. It's, if not top 5, at least top 10.
There's a lot of great stuff in the world that could end up in your top 5. Why does this end up there?
So my experience when I watched it the first time, I think Cyberpunk had one of the most satisfying narratives I have ever seen. Satisfying does not mean good.
Well, I was
It does
about
not
to
mean
say,
fun.
It's not again, spoiler alerts. Well, it's not a happy ending.
No. It is, but it's one of the most complete and well-told stories that I've seen.
Cohesive.
Yeah. Cohesive, meaningful, deep. There's lots of really great writing and storytelling pieces to it that I think put it head and shoulders above a lot of other pieces of media and stories that I've seen.
I couldn't agree more. I realized I like happy endings more, but I prefer bittersweet endings.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
If you were to tell me what are you wanting to subject your body and your mind to, it's a happy ending.
Yes.
It's not a bittersweet ending that leaves you with that like punch in the gut.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
Yeah.
But you leave thinking back on that piece of media, realizing that you prefer that way. How many times have you said, well, like that's a cliche ending. Everything worked out, whatever. It's like it's not. There's something that feels like it's not as nourishing for the soul.
Yeah.
It feels more like a happy ending is more like candy, and a bittersweet ending is more like a medium rare steak.
Yeah. Or like broccoli and Brussels sprouts.
Well, that's a good way too, maybe. You know that it's better for you.
Yeah.
And 6, 7, 8 days down the road, you're still thinking about that piece of media in the same way that broccoli is going to be interacting in your body way better a week later.
Yeah. You're going to feel better about it. You may not have liked the taste at the beginning.
Yeah.
But the feeling that you carry with you afterwards feels way better.
100%. I have some theories about why that's the case. But
Okay.
I want to know from your perspective, why do you think that we so overwhelmingly respond better to bittersweet endings? And maybe why do you think that that's something that we know that we resonate with that more?
Yeah. So, okay, I want some clarification then, because when we say better and when we say resonate, what specifically are you noticing in your reaction, particularly where you're like, that's what I'm looking for. That's the better thing.
So I know from a filmmaker, so this is where my question is actually genuine. I know why this works from a filmmaking perspective.
Okay.
I don't know why this works. I have theories about why this works psychologically.
Tell me about what the film theory is for why that works and why we resonate better with a bittersweet ending.
When you have a bittersweet ending, you immediately have contrast in your story. So a lot of what people are looking for in film, in every area, in your lighting, in your sound, everything can be boiled down in a sense to contrast.
Right.
Like your color correction, you need to be able to see your lights and your darks separately. That's also like a really interesting, people love the style because the blacks are so black and the whites are so blown out white. Like you've got such a really clear contrast. The neon lights, the color is really really extreme. And so you get that separation. A lot of the times there's these shots on the faces where you got purple and green on either side. Contrast is baked into that. And one of the reasons that contrast looks good when you're doing photography or even just like filming a facial feature of a subject is because contrast defined the outlines really, really well. So like a nice Rembrandt lighting, it's kind of soft, but it's still got that contrast because it allows you to see the curvature and the defined features of a face.
There's
you
like
can
clarity,
see the cheekbones.
definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
That little triangle on the side of the face, it's made because the nose bridge is casting a shadow here, and you get a really clear understanding of the facial features of that character. It really defines things and shows you exactly where everything is.
Yeah.
And so in a similar way, a bittersweet ending, what I notice is this big moment of realization. It's when they're on the moon and Lucy's achieved her dream. She sees these memories of David being on the moon with her. And it's this punch in the gut because you're like, oh, shoot, her dream is actually so much less valuable than her relationship with David was.
Yeah.
And it's this horrifying realization that you achieved the thing you wanted at the expense of something that was more important. And that's horrible to feel and to experience. Yeah. But what it does is the sadness that you feel in that moment highlights how good that relationship was.
Yeah.
And so the emotional contrast from a writing perspective, you need to feel the really sad moments to prove how great the good moments were.
Yeah.
The fact that you're horrified at the fact that she's no longer with David shows you how much you liked the fact that she was with David, how great they were together, and how much you rooted for them as a couple.
Yeah, totally. There's something when you're talking about that where it starts to, in me, make me think about the highlighting that's happening there really is kind of a lesson that's showing up, or a truth or a value or whatever you want to say. But it's highlighted by that, we'd maybe call it a negative or unpleasant emotion, right? The bittersweetness, the sadness, what is it saying in that context at the end? What was Lucy's dream actually? Was it that tangible, more surface level idea of go to the moon? Or was it the idea of she was hoping to achieve something by going there, that the moon is a means, not an end? And that perhaps when she's envisioning David, his life, him potentially being there, does that maybe indicate that her relationship with him was that the end rather than her getting to the moon?
Oh, 100%. And that was actually shown really clearly in one of the final scenes of the film when he's got the big mech suit on, and then he jumps out of the tower and they're like falling together. And she breaks him out of that cyber psychosis state. They're silhouetted in the moon.
Yep.
And so it's this clear, it's just a visual representation of exactly that. It's that the dream that you're now going to achieve, that I'm sending you on your way, wasn't actually the dream. And this is that clarifying moment of now because you've been aiming for this thing, now you know what it is that you actually want. And it wasn't that thing to begin with. Because I think that's the thing with Lucy too, because I feel like we could get into, talk about contrast. Her and David's relationship with dreams and goals is polar opposite. And I'm wondering if you pulled that out. What I noticed most clearly is that what I saw in David and myself is a tendency to achieve other people's dreams.
I knew from day one I'd never belong there.
So why stick around for so long? Or at all?
Good fucking question. Guess it was for Mom. Was kinda her dream, all that saga stuff. Our dream, I guess. Or whatever.
It's not your dream, though, is it?
So his mom, go to a good school, get a good education. I want this good life for you. That was never what he wanted, but he did it because he cared about her. He's kind of aimless for a while. Then he joins the crew. Then he takes on Maine's vision. Then he tries to fulfill Lucy's dream. And he's always filling other people's dreams, and he doesn't have one for himself. Contrast that with Lucy, who her entire childhood she was a child soldier fulfilling somebody else's dream. Like her entire life is just, I've been fulfilling other people's dreams and I cannot do that anymore.
And then finally, what is her tangible goal to be opposed to that? I want to go to the moon. I want that. That's something that's for me, not for anybody else.
100%. It just goes to show that central element of contrast is you could not get more opposite. And that was never spoken in the show. It was just shown.
We're exactly the same.
You and I are worlds apart.
And
it's a cool thing about when you talk about contrast, because then you have these two contrasting characters, and maybe this is part of psychologically why we like it, and it kind of speaks more to character-driven narratives too, in opposed to just bittersweet pieces. But it's that when you have two things of contrast, and then you bring them together, what happens? How do they interact? In a lot of ways, you don't really know. And I think a story writing trick or tip that I've heard a lot that I really like is don't write narratives, write characters, put them in a situation and just watch what happens. And that tends to be a lot more organic and a lot more interesting. And it kind of lets these different values and symbolic elements play out how they naturally would. So that you're almost discovering it rather than trying to contrive something that's written.
Anytime you can bring contrast into a story, I think it allows the audience to really pull out the pieces that they might not have been able to see before.
Totally.
That's what I noticed with the fact that it was such a bittersweet ending. I cared most about their relationship when it was no longer there after David died.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think, gosh, I don't want to bounce all over the place, but I saw a clip from South Park, which Butters it's so stupid, but it's like he gets broken up with. And then
I think I saw this recently, actually, where he's sitting in the gutter or he's like by the side of the road, and then all the goth kids come over to him, and it's like this like really philosophically and personally like poignant conversation between these children about the nature of love and being human.
But you just got dumped. Well, yeah, and I'm sad. But at the same time, I'm really happy that something can make me feel that sad. It's like, it makes me feel alive, you know? It makes me feel human. The only way I can feel this sad now is if I felt something really good before. So I have to take the bad with the good. So I guess what I'm feeling is like a beautiful sadness.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I'm sad that she's gone.
And he talks about the contrast.
Yeah. He's like, the fact that I'm so sad as I am now shows that it was actually really valuable.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel alive.
Yes. And I think that, like, when you're talking about it from a psychological perspective, it's that up and down. It's the going between different pieces, the vibrancy, the shift. This is a little bit more philosophical, but you can
go for it.
Well, it kind of makes you ask the question, like, what is life? What, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is life exactly? Or what is the point of life? Or what's life's purpose? Or anything like that. And I think one of the things that we can start to observe when we contrast, living things with non-living things, or, this kind of applies to matter in general, but one of the elements that we notice of living things is that there is inherent and consistent change. We go from this state of being young to being adults to being elderly to being dead. And all throughout the way, everything is changing. Nothing ever remains static. It kind of goes back to that old idea, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? It's like the opposite of death is change. It's dynamic. And so I think when we have a bittersweet, like even just in the title, like bittersweet, there's already a contrast and a pull between two opposites. And it's the movement between two different things, right? That is what life really is. Life isn't here. Life isn't here. Life is the movement between these 2 points.
Totally.
And I think usually what a bittersweet story will do is it's going to take you on a journey. And it's going to take you through lots of different things because it'll show you the good, it'll show you the bad, it'll show you the highs, it'll show you the lows. A happy ending, or even like in a happy ending show, there's still a shift and a change that occurs because, like, inherent to any storytelling piece has to be problem, right? So character encounters a problem, tries to find a solution, your act 1, 2, and 3. So even in something that has a happy ending, in isolation, a happy ending story can be good. I think what you see is that there can be a dissatisfaction if every single story that you see follows that same pattern. Because now on the micro, there's a little bit of a shift, but on the macro, it's just stagnation.
Yeah.
It's the same thing repeated over and over and over and over again. No change.
So you're talking about if in popular culture, the bittersweet ending was more common, like it was the 90 percentile rather than the 10.
Yeah.
Then we would have the opposite reaction. We'd crave then the more happy endings.
Exactly. It would look like instead of this cotton candy thing that's kind of obfuscating the reality of life, where the bittersweetness kind of shows up as this, glimpse of reality. If it was the reverse and it was 90-10 the other way, it would be this sea of nihilism where one bright light shows up. And it's like, oh, finally a little bit of hope to show us that not everything is so terrible and awful.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I think part of me agrees 100% with that take. I just don't ever see bittersweet becoming the norm.
Yeah.
I think it's too risky. I think the inherent reason that we view the ending of a relationship or a tough conversation or calling something, we inherently view that risk or that volatility as something to avoid.
Yeah.
And so I don't think filmmakers are necessarily going to start picking up and being like, all right, time to make a lot of bittersweet endings. Let's do it.
That's all we're going to do for every age group,
cry.
every demographic.
Yeah. Exactly. The Barbie movie is not going to end with Barbie dying and, bullet hole through the center of the temple. It's like, it was all worth it.
Ken kind of sitting in an existential crisis being like, oh, this was all my fault in the end, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, if only I'd done this.
Yeah.
I care about you so much. I realize now after the fact. It's like, no, that's not, I don't think that's going to become the norm. But I do see what you mean about it's not just the element of what it does story-wise. It's also fulfilling a need within the psyche of viewers.
Yeah.
It's like we're not getting enough of a real engagement with what life is really like, because how many times does life actually give you that happy ending?
Yeah.
Versus a bittersweet ending. How many times do you lose in a match? Rolling jujitsu, or at a competition, if you're doing CrossFit, it's like how many times are you the winner? Like really?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. How many times are you the winner? Is that an issue with life, or is that an issue with you?
No, that's just a part of life, and it's not even losing. It's not even losing being an issue. It's just the fact that if you're a tournament with 9 other people, and you're the 10th person, if you were to evenly distribute wins, you would only still win 10% of the time. And no matter, and maybe you go to 10 different tournaments and you win all 10, then you are experiencing that wonderful beauty, but everybody else is having a bittersweet. So across the macro, even if your individual experience is super, super happy and sweet, the bittersweet is still so much more common throughout life.
Probably, yeah. But the question is, what do you do with that? How do you interact with the bittersweet, and what is its purpose and function? Because I think that's the other half of the psychological piece of these bittersweet stories, is that it's about, what is that trying to tell you? What do you learn from that, right? And I think when we look at a bittersweet story like Cyberpunk, if we go to the end and we look at Lucy getting to the moon, but it's without David, and there's a piece of like, oh, was the goal really while they were falling from the tower rather than actually getting to the moon? And what it does is that bittersweetness, I feel like psychologically, it's the inherent piece of any negative emotion. Is people think that negative emotion is like life torturing you in some way. It's not. It's an orienting process of your brain. It's directing you towards information and goals, right? So the fact that Lucy gets there and she's like, oh, I got to my goal, and all I can do is I can think about a friend and a lover that I lost.
Yeah.
What does that tell you? That tells me that that's more important because I accessed this thing, but now I'm just thinking about this thing that was lost. So that's the thing that I want to go for. That is the goal, right? You think about it like, okay, so there's the bitterness of loss, of going into a jiu-jitsu tournament and I get smoked by somebody. Okay, what do I learn from that? Where did I fail? Where did I not have enough training? Was my conditioning a problem? What am I learning from this in order to reorganize my life to aim more effectively towards my goals? The next time that I get into a tournament, what am I going to do? Am I going to come in with a new game plan? Am I going to approach this differently? How am I going to attack it? So I feel like there's a real value there in that, we don't just look at the bittersweetness for that piece of this is how it feels, but it's functional. It has a purpose in our lives. What are we going to do with it?
I think that goes back to what we talked about last week, where a moment that resonates with you does so partially because you realize that it's true.
Yeah, because there's a truth in it.
Yeah, because you're realizing that it's not just a moment, it's directing you towards something that you should do likewise. Because I was about to ask you, are you speaking about what do you learn from that? Are you talking about as a viewer watching Lucy, or if you are Lucy, or if you are the person who loses that jiu-jitsu tournament? Because I don't necessarily think they're different. It's just, where are you standing while you're receiving that lesson?
Well, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about stories, is that it doesn't matter if you're watching it or if you're experiencing it. Wherever you stand in position to that lesson, it's a transcendent truth. It's one of the beautiful things that I think, and it's why stories can be, I feel like, a really uniting force for anybody in humanity, no matter what their positioning is that the thing that is true for that person at that deep of a level, where it transcends anything on the surface and it gets to what is at the core of humanity, what is true for that person is true for me too. And I can learn something whether I'm experiencing it or whether I'm observing it.
Totally, 100%. That goes back to something else that we talked about too. We get to access an emotion or an experience in a safe position.
Yeah.
So I know that the bittersweetness that I experience from watching the ending of Cyberpunk Edgerunners is way more digestible than losing a jiu-jitsu tournament after getting choked out.
Yeah, totally.
Waking up on the floor, I lost.
Exactly. And it's like, it's way more digestible than you experiencing a similar emotion with arguably, I would say definitely, but you can argue if you want to. I don't know how much you love jiu-jitsu, but you're arguably going through something that is significantly less intense.
Yeah.
There's an intensity in being the experiencer that you don't get as an audience member that actually can be beneficial, so that you get to engage with these challenges and lessons. Like, you don't actually have to lose a loved one to understand what that has to teach you. You watch that happen to Lucy, you get to learn the lesson, you get to live your life as if that happened to you, but without actually having to go through it. So you get all the benefits without having to face tragedy yourself. And I mean, the challenge for us all is that tragedy is going to occur no matter what. Totally. And eventually, you might not have dealt with what she's dealt with yet, but you will at some point. So now that you've gone through that watching somebody else, you're a little bit more prepared for it. You're like, okay, I can face this. I've seen something similar. I felt what this is like before. This is familiar rather than totally overwhelming and daunting because 100%. I've never felt it.
Yeah. Have you heard of a thing called core?
Yeah, actually.
Okay, so you're familiar with the term.
Yeah, I think like very, very recently, actually.
The fact that I know about this is exclusive to the fact that I have to do social media partly as a job. And thankfully, part of my job is just scrolling TikTok. Just like, what's trending? Let's get on. And I cannot get over how much there is bittersweet, cathartic, engaging with very negative emotion in this sort of bittersweet kind of way. Have you come across a guy called Old Time Hockey?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay, I want to show you some of his stuff.
Okay, let's pull it up.
Well, hello, buddy. Can't sleep, eh? Please, join us for some tea and some Nintendo.
So that one video has 3 million likes. And it's been viewed more than...
Not views, 3 million likes.
3 million likes, 16.2 million views. When I look at people who are popular as social media influencers these days, oftentimes I'm really confused about why this person is as popular as they are.
Okay.
And I think what I'm starting to realize more is that people of a certain demographic are all feeling very similar emotions. So people under 30 in a big city are all feeling a really similar feeling.
I mean, to a degree, of course they would be, because if they're all in the environment and they all share a somewhat similar demographic, even though there might be some differences in their day-to-day lives,
of course,
their general position in life is pretty similar and relatable.
Yeah, 100%. If you were just a social media analyst, you'd look at that and you'd be like,
he's baffling.
Why is this random mustached, like ASMR breathy Canadian making tea in a cottage from the 70s? Like, why is this so overwhelmingly popular?
Yeah.
And I can't get over the idea that it has everything to do with people latching on to the idea that this is an accurate depiction of the way I'm feeling right now. I think what a lot of people, and this is why I kind of brought this up as like a thing that young people, people like under 30, for example, I think there's an overwhelming sense that things are not okay.
Yeah.
And I think what this is, in its rawest sense, is an acknowledgement that not everything is right, but that things are going to be okay.
Ooh.
Because like inherent within that, just that little snippet there is you can't sleep. There's a problem.
Yeah.
It's this tone of like, like things aren't the way they should be.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get through it. We're gonna have fun. We're gonna make the most of it. And everything about his music choice, everything about the way that he's talking, this sense of nostalgia, being in a comfortable, familiar place. Like how many kids are watching that being like, oh, I played that video game. Oh, that brings back good, familiar, comforting memories. It's just like a warm blanket for your soul.
It's like your existential societal parent.
Yeah.
Like you want somebody coming and saying, oh, it's okay, buddy.
Yeah.
Let's make you some soothing tea. Let's play some video games to get your mind off things, to, in this circumstance, probably to like get your mind off things so that you can relax a little bit, go to sleep, right? You don't have to be so burdened by the world's problems.
Yeah. But the reason that this kind of came to my mind is it gives me the same feeling as a Bittersweet ending does. It's this idea that not everything's okay.
Yeah.
But everything's still going to work out.
Yeah.
Have you seen 500 Days of Summer?
No, I've never seen it.
Or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
No.
Very, very sad movies.
Yeah.
And not at all a happy ending, but they give you a sense that hope is possible. It's not this everybody died and the world is for naught, and it's not like a Cabin in the Woods type of ending where like, well, we released evil into the world and it's just going to destroy everybody.
Yeah.
It's this sense of things didn't work out, but things are not over. And I think that there's an element that our culture is really, really resonating with that type of media.
Yeah.
All the way from movies and TV series, all the way down to the kind of 30-second social media content that we watch.
Yeah.
I think there's this overwhelming sense that if something accurately portrays the world as I'm experiencing with it, but also gives me hope.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that really resonates.
Yeah.
Are you seeing anything in your current practice that would indicate that I'm anywhere along the right track with that?
To a degree, I think. I think sometimes I try to veer away from extrapolating from people's individual experiences to look at what's going on in the collective for society. You have lots of different people who have lots of different experiences. And to a degree, I also think that the problems that people face who come in to see me are universal and perpetual problems. That these have existed since the dawn of humanity and will continue to exist. Different forms they'll take through different societies and environments that we're in, but they are more or less essentially the same.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, kind of grappling with recently, is the idea around social media and the changes in technology and how changes in technology may have influenced mental health.
Wow. Okay. Talk about a good segue from Cyberpunk.
Well, hopefully we can come back.
Changes in technology impacting your psychological state of being?
Well,
wow.
Exactly, right?
Is that a central theme in the series?
Well, yeah. I mean, the idea is, actually, if we look at cyberpsychosis, kind of as this idea, one of the main, I don't want to call it a contrivance, but like one of the main elements that kind of continues to go through the plot and kind of nicely weaves in for a lot of different themes depending on how you want to look at it. One of the things that we observe in cyberpsychosis is that it's the direct result of too much technological integration into organic human material. So it's when you start to overload that human system and it starts to be uncertain and unable to recognize what is human, what is technology. When there becomes so little of you left, that is when cyberpsychosis starts to take over. And I feel like it's a really good analogy. In many ways, it's a micro version because this happens in a lot of other places in Cyberpunk. But part of what we look at when it comes to how we experience trauma is that trauma is inherently an overwhelm of the system. So when I'm overwhelmed, powerless, and kind of pulling off what you were talking about before, hopelessness, right? Those are really key elements of trauma. And you could think that if technology is completely overwhelming the human body, the human nervous system, the human mind, there's going to be an element of trauma that shows up. we don't usually think about it that way, because trauma, a lot of people will understand as like this one-time event that occurs and you're traumatized because this happened in the war or in your home or whatever the case is. But in the research, what we're starting to understand is that we're looking at trauma a little bit differently. The event that happens is kind of surface level. Trauma is more of the process that takes place inside your body, not what happened to you.
Right.
So what I'm curious about is how much has the exponential increase in technology, specifically through our medium of interaction, because technology has been improving and advancing for a long time, but it's this, particularly how does technology interact with human attention?
Oh, really negatively.
Yeah, well, like we talk about it being the attention economy now, right? And this is what it's all about. This is what social media is about. And there are ways that technology has kind of interacted with human attention in the past, but nothing like it does now. Especially, I think, the speed. Nothing as fast. It's like if you ever run on a treadmill and you get going and you're like, I want to push myself and see how far I can go. You're starting at like a walking speed. And you're like, this is comfortable. I can deal with this. You start to ramp it up. Okay, I'm getting a little bit more intense. I've entered zone 2 now. I can still carry on a conversation, but this is getting more intense. Then you start to move into a run, like a real intense run. And then you could start sprinting and say, okay, this is like pretty intense. I'm kind of at my limit here. This is good, but I can still do this. I'm here. And you imagine somebody walking up to your machine and just going, and just ramping up the speed. And part of what I feel like, or that I'm curious about, I wonder how much in this kind of 2007 onwards advent of social media in its current form, how much did that cross the threshold for our ability to keep up with the treadmill?
Yeah.
And now is technology outpacing us?
I can't see it any other way than that.
Yeah.
What I think I'll say, just maybe in defense of social media, is that I don't think I don't think social media itself is the problem. I think that what it is that it's exactly what you said. It's outpacing us.
Yeah.
And I think the piece that's outpacing us is the fact that now it is always with us. It's attached, because when you look at the data, you probably know this data more than I do.
Yeah.
But mental health decline and indicators of negative states of being mentally are not paired as close with social media as they are with smartphone integration.
Yeah.
So it's actually interesting, because it's less than a part of our social media networks and more about this, almost in a way like this cybernetic extension of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's this in a really funny kind of parallel way to the show, where we have this new piece of technology that is, it's not attached to us, but it might as well be.
Yeah.
It's that integrated with our everyday life.
We'll put it this way. People essentially treat it like it's attached to them.
Oh, yeah.
And their bodies respond as if it's attached to them when we lose it.
So how much of our current negative mental health state in our world is due to the fact that we are undergoing, in not just a metaphorical way, but more or less a real cyberpsychosis?
Yeah. Yeah. You could certainly make an argument for that. And it makes me curious then about like the cottagecore stuff you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That's almost, there's a lot of different layers to it. There's like a slowing down piece, but there's also, even when you look at the video games that he's playing, right?
Yeah.
Playing Super Nintendo, he's playing N64. That is a backtracking technologically. It's turning the dial on the treadmill back down to what is comfortable.
Totally.
Okay, this is achievable. And so, yeah, it's this, I think I agree with you. It's is it inherent to social media, or is it the interaction between the social media structure and the method by which we access it?
I think
the quick flip going through, the speed at which, if there was just like Instagram that you could potentially access, but it was back on dial-up, would that make it a little bit different? Would that be easier?
I do think so, but not inherently. I think it's because we, like David does, we lack the self-control to be able to say, this is enough. I've reached my limit for what I should reasonably do. And the thing with David is that he actually proved he could do more, but he was just kicking the can down the road. He did have an unusual ability to withstand the effects of technology integrated with his system. Like maybe I would say the same thing about me. I might be able to do 4 hours of social media content more healthily than another person would. That doesn't mean that I should.
Yeah.
I think the speed's a part of it. I think it's the ease of access, but I think that's just making it more difficult for people to say no, and I think that's the real problem. People's inability to say enough's enough. I need to self-regulate. I need to be able to say enough's enough. And so much so that it's become a thing where there's all these little contraptions where you can lock your phone away and you need to externalize your self-control almost.
That idea of externalizing and challenges with self-control, it makes me wonder about the same process that occurs in the show, right? Because part of cyberpsychosis and the problem is that, like, in many ways it feels very similar for me because, like you said, I can see all the research. I can understand it. Does that change my social media habits?
Oh, not at all.
It's really hard. And it's the same thing, I think, when you look at the different characters in the show who are going through their cyberization process. It's not like they don't know cyberpsychosis, one, is a thing, they've observed it, or two, that it's happening for them. Symptoms are showing up well before there's a problem. They can see that there's an issue with plenty of time to turn around. None of them do.
Why do you think that is? Because I think you probably have seen that pretty commonly.
Yeah.
People see these signs, and we could even extrapolate this to one of the things that I saw very clearly portrayed was addiction.
Yeah.
I think addiction, inability to say no, trauma, these are all really core themes. The addiction piece one, I wonder how much that translates to what you're talking about. How many times do you see people who clearly have all the warning signs? They see them, they recognize them, but they choose not to do anything about them. And why do you think that is?
Yeah. You have a lot of parallels with this with other things in the world too. It's interesting because I think if you've been watching pieces of media recently, I think there's started to become this growing awareness of the problems around like homelessness, opiate addiction, things like that. And I think it's interesting for you and I to watch because, like, living in British Columbia, being close to Vancouver,
having lived it right by the downtown core.
Yeah, like we've been aware of this problem for a long time, and so it's like everybody else kind of coming to observe something that we've known and seen for years. You really have to start to ask yourself the question: why do people continue to engage in these behaviors? Right.
Now, when you're talking about, you're not talking about people observing it and just turning a blind eye. You're talking about the people who are actually...
Yeah, people in active addiction.
People who are using fentanyl on the downtown east side.
Exactly, yeah. And why is that? Because one of the things you'll hear, I work a lot with first responders. And so one of the things that they'll always talk about is multiple OD calls to the same person in the same day.
Oh.
Like going back to the same person who ODs 3 times in a day. And so this person's, like you'll even hear when you listen to interviews of people who've been through addiction of like, they'll count how many times they've OD'd, how close did they get? And so you have somebody coming towards the brink of death. I mean, very similar when we think about the running, the running theme in Cyberpunk, over the edge. Why are they getting close to that? And I think in addiction, very similar to the show, we have to look at what is the function of the behavior that brings you to the edge. When I look at people's behavior, I really resist using the term self-sabotage because in my opinion, that is never the case. It's not like there is a part of you who is just inherently wanting to see you suffer and fail. It's always competing interests. So if this is bringing you towards a really negative consequence, it's only because something that has gained power inside of you is aimed towards a different goal or value that it perceives as more important.
Your actions are always logical. You just don't necessarily have that person's perspective.
Exactly. Yes. The reason that actions look illogical is because your observations on the outside are very different than that person's inside experience. So if we look at one of the things that we'll often talk about when it comes to addictions, we usually will see substance addictions as some kind of physiological or emotional regulation tool. So substances are often used to regulate things like physical pain. So people getting into opiate addiction because they have an injury or they go through surgery, they have Oxycontin or something like that, and then they go to the next thing.
Yeah.
Kind of keep going.
Which is easy to understand. It's like, I am in pain. I want to take that pain away.
Yep.
This thing does that.
Exactly. But the same process also occurs emotionally. And that can be anything from, like, this isn't just I feel sad. It's, you go back to what we think about with the cottagecore piece. Like, how would you treat deep-seated hopelessness? If somebody was in the grips of the emotion of feeling hopeless and worthless and like nothing was actually worth doing, like they were nothing, how do you deal with that? Opiates can be a really good way to ignore that feeling of pain because it works on the emotions just in the same way as it works in the body. So you think about, why would somebody continue to get close to that edge? Well, it's either you risk going to the edge of oblivion and nothingness, or you eliminate that horrific existential pain. And if you're in that position, you can almost empathize with people in that way of saying, well, your options are either experience that intense pain, experience nothing because you're dealing with these substances and so you feel better, or you die, in which case the pain ends.
I have nothing to lose.
Yeah. So if you look at it from their perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense why they'd keep going back to it, because the living without opiates is the worst of their three possibilities in terms of lived experience.
Wow. Hearing you say it like that really crystallizes it. Literally, you have three options, and the obvious best choice is the one that is actually the worst when you step into the shoes of the person who's actually ODing multiple times.
Yeah. The best choice objectively
is also the worst choice objectively.
Subjectively. Yeah.
Subject. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, the best choice objectively is the worst one subjectively. The best choice we would observe from the objective perspective outside can oftentimes be the worst choice for the person in their subjective experience. Like, we think about what it's like to go through that pain. You're watching that show, right? It's kind of the nice thing about stories too, because it gives us that lens into somebody else's experience. We can almost step into their shoes for what we're talking about here without having to go through an addiction to see, oh, this is what it's like, right? So you think about in Cyberpunk, how they set up the whole show. I think it becomes significantly easier for us to, let's put it this way. Let's say the show starts when David meets Lucy.
Yeah.
We don't have any of his backstory. We don't have any of his context. We would look at his addiction to cyberization and we'd be like, what an absolute idiot. This guy, Maine, all these people, there's just something wrong with them. But that's not where the writers start the show. They start the show before his tragedy. We can see what he has. Despite the conflicts with his mom, he has somebody who cares about him and loves him. Arguably, based on what we are shown by the writers, the only person in his life who cares about him and loves him. He does not have a father figure. He does not have friends at school. So that is his one person. She dies horrifically, taken from him, not disease, not illness, killed by somebody. Now he's 100% alone. So what do you think he's going to do? Of course, he's going to try to grasp at power in a world that treats human beings as cheap. And so to try to avoid that, being obliterated by the world around him. So because we experience his pain with him, we understand the context for his behaviors afterwards. And it's one of the things I always like to talk to clients about is when we're looking at other people, or even when you're trying to understand yourself. It's like, if you knew the whole story, if you had complete awareness of everything in your unconscious, or complete awareness of everything in somebody else's life, every single thing you do or they do would make sense.
Yeah.
But because we're obscured both from somebody else's life, because we're not living it, and from our own subconscious or unconscious, we are left kind of uncertain. We're confused. We don't know why we do what we do. We don't know why other people do what they do.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. But one thing that I was struck by when you were saying that is that I really empathize with David, despite knowing that his decisions are objectively wrong.
Yeah.
And objectively his decisions are going in the wrong direction, and you know that, and you're sort of screaming in your mind like, no, like you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're also like, I probably would do the same thing.
Yeah.
And when I caught myself realizing that as you were talking, I could not help but think back to good old Galadriel from the Rings of Power, and how there's a very clear symmetry to the way that they try to build that backstory. Gifted young person.
Yep.
Whose family member was taken away.
Yep.
And also makes illogical, rash decisions.
Yeah.
But none of those elements, I can't empathize with her. I don't think that, despite knowing also that your decisions are probably wrong, I would not do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I also don't really care for you as a character.
Yeah.
And I don't believe your relationships.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an important piece to realize that bad things happening to a character does not make you empathize with them and does not bring you closer to them. And so I'm interested, from your perspective, what do you think is a key difference there? Why do you think we relate so much to David and not to Galadriel?
So one thing I wonder about, because I haven't seen Rings of Power.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Oh, here I am, like poo-pooing on it, and you haven't even seen it.
It's maybe it's hard because now it's like, well, do I want to watch it? Well, who knows? I'll give it a shot.
If you have 8 to 10 hours that you don't mind
don't mind
losing for the sake of context.
Well, it's for the context, right? So what I see in David is when he's making these decisions that we observe as the audience are going in a wrong direction, over the edge. They're taking him towards oblivion, right? We can see that it's going down a road that's not going to end well for him.
Yeah.
But we also empathize with it. I think part of where I noticed myself seeing that is in the struggle for him to make choices.
Yeah.
It's like the emotional turmoil that he experiences that result in him making these decisions.
What I see that's so different is that I see, this goes back to what we talked about before. I see a genuine human being who's not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that he is wearing a mask in a sense, but you see through it.
Yeah,
you see. Oh, that's so interesting. I'm struggling to figure out why, technically, from a story perspective, from a filmmaking perspective, why we can see through that mask and why it's so more authentic and genuine. And the thing that I keep coming back to is that we're experiencing things with him, not watching him do things.
Yeah.
It's a really subtle line.
Yeah.
But when I watch The Rings of Power, I feel like I'm watching somebody and I don't have access to inner thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Yeah.
And when I watch Cyberpunk, I am bombarded with thoughts, feelings, and emotions in a way that I resonate with. And despite knowing is wrong, even if I think I would make different decisions, I have full cohesive understanding that despite it being wrong, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think one of the subtle ways that line can be crossed over from watching to experiencing is through the relationships between the two characters on screen. So I think it's the last or second last episode when David finds that last piece of technology that Arasaka sets up for him, and he's in the flipped over truck, and it's Arasaka has set this whole thing up so that you will test this to give them data and information. So that's exactly what they want you to do, and it's a terrible idea because it's almost certainly going to mean that he dies. But they've constructed the setup in such a way where Lucy's life is at risk.
Yeah.
And so they've almost kind of dangled this carrot in front of him to try to get him to test it.
Yeah.
And you don't just have David there and he doesn't just jump right into it. You see the battle between him and Rebecca.
Yeah.
Where she's the voice saying, like, don't be an idiot. don't do this, but not just from a rational perspective. She's not saying it from the objective, well, I can see that this is going to be a problem. And you see how Arasaka set this whole thing up. That's the context in which she's saying. But the subtext, what's underneath, and the expression, the emotion, she's like, I love you. Don't do this. It's her emotional expression that really gets us to that. And you see like all of David's facial expressions when he's going through that is this like, it's weird because he goes through a whole lot and it's really subtle, but I think it's so well done when this is kind of more on the animator side of things, but when they can draw those expressions that really connect and resonate with us as people.
Totally.
You can almost see he's got this like resignation to him.
Yeah. Well, it shows that it's not an easy, I think we talked a while ago about how stoicism, although being cool, isn't relatable.
Yeah.
And so if David was to take on this like, well, Lucy's life is in danger, and despite not wanting to, I must do it for the grit.
He's not making a noble sacrifice, being like, I know that this is it, but I must do this. He's like,
I really am torn.
Yeah.
This is clearly, but I got to, because you see him struggle through that decision. You can actually put yourself a little bit more in his shoes.
Yeah.
And he actually feels more like a real character to you. And you can actually relate to him more. Mm-hmm. And he feels like, and the thing that I'm wondering about, how much do we actually genuinely care about him because we're engrossed in the decision-making process with him? Mm-hmm. We're not seeing him make a decision and being like a judgmental third-party observer. We're struggling through it with him, and we're a part of that decision-making process because we have enough time to say, oh, shoot, that is a good, like, well, I mean, yeah, like that does make sense. Even just being able to sit with a facial expression of a character and be like, man, like, what would I do?
Yeah.
What would I do? And putting yourself into that story.
Well, and I think this is the nice thing too about when you, in a way, your comparison here is kind of bringing us back to what you talked about with like happy ending pieces versus bittersweet. When you observe a character doing something in a show and there's dissonance between you and them, where you're like, I wouldn't do that, or part of me is telling you don't do that. In a way, that almost makes us step back and be like, well, what's going on here? Hang on a second. I'm not just passively following along. It's almost like that dissonance activates something inside of me to the point, and I say activates because it's almost like it makes me now an active participant rather than a passive viewer. Even though I'm still watching and an audience member, I'm actively engaged in the story.
Yes.
And when you have that, I think a big piece of seeing characters make wrong choices comes down to activating that part of you. If you watch a character just make good decisions or do the right thing or be brave all the time, like you don't get to what is behind the bravery, which courage can't exist in a context without fear.
Totally.
And it's not the idea that courage is not the antithesis of fear or anxiety. Courage is the ability or the choice to act in spite of that fear. So when you watch a character who's able to do everything and it doesn't feel like there's that struggle, there's not that contrast, there's no dissonance. They haven't, the writers have not reached through the screen and activated that thing in you by creating dissonance.
I wonder too how much that is inviting the audience to do work in the film. So from a behind the scenes filmmaking perspective, as a video editor, I feel like 99% of my job is making a piece of content more easy for an audience to digest.
Well, that's the whole,
like easier for even going down to stuff like if you take a Christopher Nolan film, for example, The Dark Knight does this really well in the early stages where the eye line of where important things are changes, but from shot to shot, it stays relatively similar. So if a guy's like going down this big zip line, where he ends on that zip line is roughly around the place where the point of interest is for the next shot.
Yeah.
And then
Nolan's like carried you through that frame into that position.
So a lot of filmmaking is taking away work from the audience, but from a story perspective, I feel like it's almost flipped. You want your audience to be actively doing a lot of heavy lifting mentally but not a lot of heavy lifting visually or you don't want them to work hard to enjoy your film, but you want their brain to be working hard.
So that's almost like what I was going to say, but I stopped myself because it clearly wasn't what you're talking about. I thought you were going to be talking about getting engagement from the audience.
Yeah.
Which is that opposite side of the coin.
Oh,
right?
You mean like and subscribe?
Yeah. Like, well, why
like
would
and
I
subscribe, please?
Yeah. Thank you. But why would I do that?
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't bother doing that if I'm not engaged. If I get engaged to it, okay, now I'm active. Now you've already triggered that in me, so I'm going to go through, do these things because it's kind of a natural outworking of that. But it's weird. It kind of sets up these different roles in storytelling. They each have different functions. And it kind of makes me think about what we were talking about before we started this, because we were looking at what makes things effective. We were talking about production value versus authenticity. And it is that idea of the production value really is about reducing friction.
Yes.
It's about being able to allow your audience to observe this with as little distraction or challenge as possible. While the people involved in the visual side, it's about reducing that friction. Production value is about making it as easy as possible. It's as easy as possible so that the audience can engage with whatever it is. That's
100%.
Storytelling for an audience member should not be a passive experience.
No, not at all.
It should be an active experience.
It's so true. The entire reason why do you reduce friction?
Yeah.
It's not just because friction, it's because you want all of the focus and all of the friction to be in one particular area.
Yeah.
So like you don't want to reduce all friction, period, so that you're not experiencing anything then.
So one thing that I wonder about with that, I saw this recently. I'm curious to get your take on it. It was the idea that somebody had said, passivity breeds hopelessness.
Oh, are you talking about just in life?
Yeah.
More generally.
It kind of comes back particularly to what we're talking about with technology. So that the more you're engaged in pieces of passive medium, the idea or the contrivance this person was coming up with was that essentially the more that you engage in what is pacifying or you're a passive observer, the more that you are creating in yourself a sense that this is how things will be in life perpetually. Kind of creates this lack of dynamism. It's kind of going back to that stagnation death piece. Versus when you're more active, and particularly active in engaging in challenging things that are difficult, a little bit like this bittersweet idea of engaging in something that's not 100% pleasant, cotton candy, all that goodness. That's actually activating something inside you that observes, I can make impact and change.
Yes.
That's where my sense of hope comes from.
Ooh. Okay, that's a good point.
It's the ability that the change or the difference in my future resides here within my control, rather than being something external to me that may show up or may not show up. But either way, I can't trust it because I'm not in control of it.
I think I 100% agree with that, especially when it comes to short form social media content. I notice that if I consume content that is not challenging, I don't know if it's I think I would characterize it as a sense of hopelessness, but only because you said it. I don't think that's how I would have described it prior to you saying that.
Yeah.
I think it would have just been more of a sense of apathy and blandness.
Yeah.
I think that there's a little bit of truth to that. You said earlier on, if you're not growing, you're dying. I think that is true, not just metaphorically. I think that's literally true to a degree. If your body is not engaged in physical exertion to at least some degree, you will wither and die. People who are not engaged in physical activity die. So it's not even a controversial statement. You need to exercise to live longer. I think the same is true for our minds and for the content that we consume. If everything that you're doing is mindless, there's a little bit of a numbingness. I don't know if it's because the content itself is poison as much as it's just the mental equivalent of sitting on a couch and doing nothing.
Is it the content or is it the process? Is it the position that it puts you in?
Yeah, exactly. But from maybe a more storytelling perspective, that immediately brings to my mind some pieces of the Shawshank Redemption.
Okay.
Hopelessness and hope is a really central core theme to that movie. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Okay. How recently?
It's been a while, but I've seen it once or twice.
Okay. Do you remember the character Brooks?
Which one is he?
He's the old guy who ends up getting out and ends up himself.
Oh, no, I don't remember who it
So
was.
what ends up happening is that Brooks is characterized as somebody. Well, a lot of characters in The Shawshank are characterized as lacking hope.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Andy Dufresne so unique, is that he's the only one with hope. And he sort of spills that out into everybody else. He gives them hope.
If I'm remembering correctly, that's like the primary contrast between him and the main intensity of interaction between him and Morgan Freeman's character is that like Morgan Freeman's character has been in this, space for a long time, and all of a sudden this person comes in with hope, and now it's like, oh, okay, this is different, and now this activates a whole bunch of things in all these different characters in this prison.
100%.
Okay.
But the reason that I bring that up is because Brooks gets out of prison and ends up going back to normal life.
Yeah.
But it's because he has... There's this interesting scene where he, inside of prison still, knowing that he's going to get out soon, he takes one of his friends hostage and threatens to kill him so that he will get more jail time, so that he doesn't have to change his circumstances.
Yeah.
And there's elements of that I see in really, really aggressively over the top, just consuming passive social media content, where there's almost like this inability to then jump back into the normal world. It lulls you into this state where we call it doom scrolling, because you're just there. You're just, go. And you know that it's not right. Brooks knew that being inside of... If you were to objectively say, is it better to be in prison or is it better to be a contributing member of society? Anybody's going to say that. But that doesn't stop the doom scrolling mentality of, I just got to stay here. It doesn't matter if it's a cat playing a keyboard or if it's old-time hockey telling me everything's good. Like, I just keep going because I can't deal with the outside world.
Goes back to what we were talking about with addiction, right?
Yeah.
What's from the outside objective perspective what we think is the right answer, but from somebody's internal subjective experience, why are they making those different choices? Yeah.
So that's why I think that the consumption of passive social media content is not the problem in and of itself, just in the same way that Brooks being in prison wasn't the problem. It's your engagement with that process. And if you make that your world, and if there is no hope, like the reason that people are doom scrolling is not because they desperately want to say at the end of the day, I spent X many hours just scrolling through social media. It's because I have no hope for what is beyond this. Whatever this is, it's better than what's out there. And so I'm just going to stay here. And the same way Brooks was like, I can't deal with what's out there. I'm going to, threaten to kill my friend so I get more jail time so that I don't have to deal with the outside world. Yeah. Because that's, I'm not going there.
Yeah. There's a real fascinating parallel with Cyberpunk there, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah,
where,
100%.
Like, Lucy essentially plays the same role as Andy Dufresne in that she is the one who escapes their current set of circumstances in which everything is, I would say in a lot of ways, the cyberpunk genre is characterized by hopelessness. Especially because, you think about how, so if you've ever read anything about how Mike Pondsmith, the guy who created the not the cyberpunk genre itself, but like the IP of cyberpunk, where there's the video game, the tabletop playing game, then this show. One of the things that he'll talk about and how he's framing the world is that it is essentially hopeless. Yeah. Like all of his main characters die in the end. Yeah. Because like this is inevitable. This is just how it's going to go. And Lucy's finally the one who's able to escape it and kind of get out of that situation, like Andy's able to dig his way through the wall and get out. The one thing that nobody thought was possible, right? Everybody in the show is thinking that you can't escape the cycle. You can't escape the cycle. This is what happens. Lucy gets out. Can't get out of Shawshank. Can't get out of Shawshank. Andy gets out.
I think that's a really good parallel. I think I didn't see it until now. She doesn't strike me in the same way because she doesn't have that. Maybe because she's not the protagonist of the story. Yeah. But in a duotagonist sort of way. Yeah. She is fulfilling that role. Yeah. She's not the one who's, I don't know, because I see her and David as both doing that a little bit for each other.
Well, that's it, right? Like Andy in the Shawshank Redemption is the one who's carrying hope inherently. He carries it from the beginning to the end. Yeah. it's not quite as clear cut
Right.
in Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Who is carrying hope necessarily at one time? And it's almost, I like when you say it's almost a deuteragonist between Lucy and David. I almost feel like when you look at the interactions between the different characters, you can almost think about hope as like this object they're passing between them all, where they're each trying to give it to the other person. When you look at the Edgerunners crew, lots of them are supporting one another through what they're doing, but each of them still has a really hard time holding on to hope for themselves.
Yeah. They all find it externally rather than internally.
Well, and it's easy for them to give it. It's very hard for them to hold it themselves.
Do you think that's true, though, just in life?
I think that's probably why we resonate with that so much.
It's easier to give hope to other people, to inspire other people, than it is to tell yourself.
1,000,000%. Absolutely. Like, that's in so many ways what I do as my job is like to give this stuff that I know to other people, but to apply it to myself, I actually don't know if I would ever be comfortable doing it solo. I almost feel like at the very least, I think you need a community of people around you who help provide you with that hope. Not even withstanding the fact that I would still continue to work with my own therapist probably for the rest of my life. Yes, specifically because I'm doing this job and I need to be in my own process too. But I think because there's that, you need somebody else to provide that thing that's often very hard for us to give to ourselves. And I think when you think about that it's a theme that I see with clients all the time, right? One of the primary things I'll see with people is, here's the way that you treat and look at everybody else in the world. And here's the way that you treat and look at yourself. These are two very different rules that you're playing by. Everybody else gets to adhere to one. You don't get to play by that same rules. You don't give yourself the same benefits that you give to other people.
Yeah.
Why is that? There's something that you can pull out of you to encourage somebody else. I'm not talking about like giving somebody platitudes like, oh, it's all going to be okay, whatever. There are so many times that you will see somebody who is struggling on their own give a genuine and authentic piece of encouragement to somebody else that they pulled somewhere out of themselves. They don't have access to it for their own life, but they can absolutely grab it and give it to somebody else in genuine affection and love. And like, what is that? Why is that door open on one side rather than the other side?
Yeah.
I feel like maybe part of that will have to do with pieces of identity and how we see ourselves, that we label somebody else differently than we label ourselves. Kind of similar to that objective, subjective thing we've been going on today of like, you can see the objective for the outside world. You know that you should try your best. You know that you are deserving of love and affection when that applies to other people. You can see that out there. But because you have to live with your own subjective experience, and that may contain a whole bunch of things that have told you otherwise, it becomes a lot easier to apply one set of rules to everybody else, but not to me. Because I feel like my identity is different than everybody else's. Totally. I've been told I'm something else than what they are.
It doesn't matter what genre or what movie, the relationships are always the thing that are the central point that you relate to.
Yeah.
You go through every possible genre and the central core are the relationships between the people. How many people, even in a film like I Am Legend, where there is one person in a sea of zombies, what is the thing that you latch onto? It's the relation, even if it's a relationship between Will Smith and his dog.
Yep.
Like that, the relationship is the thing that you latch onto.
Or in his context, the absence of relationship.
Yeah. Oh, that's...
Because absence is still a form of relationship.
Yes.
It's just that now I am distant from everybody else. You watch him on the scene with the helicopter where he's saying goodbye to his family. And it's just like, okay, he's alone. What is that? What does it mean to be alone? Alone is still contextualized by relationships. It's just the lack of them.
Yeah. Maybe that's one of the reasons that we resonate with it too, is because we know instinctually, unconsciously, that for whatever reason, be it hope, be it a support network, we need people around us.
Yeah.
And so that's why we resonate with it when we see it displayed in healthy ways in film. And even when they're dysfunctional, if the central tenet of it is good, if even the relationship between David and his mom, like it was dysfunctional, but man, it was still pure and it was gold.
I think you could say that about so many of the relationships in Cyberpunk, is that it's one of the things that will latch onto it so strongly is the struggle for relationship.
Yeah.
Because you're right, there's a purity to it despite it being not clean cut, not being perfect, being
poor communication.
Yep. People acting selfishly, people acting on their own interests, but everybody is still struggling to get to what they know is important, which is relationship, right? Like David's mom might not be doing things in the best way possible, but part of her core value that's driving it is she wants a better life for her son than she had.
Yeah.
David knows that he doesn't want to go to that school or do those things. He's like, well, can't we just figure something else out? But why is he willing to go along with it despite it not being what he wants to do? Because he loves his mom. And you see that play out with everybody else in that show. Like you think about what gets so many of those characters into trouble, right? It's one character cares about another character who's in trouble. So they try to take action to care for them. They try to take action to protect them, but that puts themselves in danger. And so then you leave another character who cares about the second character. It's like, well, no, if you try to protect them and you're in danger, now I'm stuck. So I've got to try to protect you. And it's just this train of trying to protect these people who you care about that, I was going to say, unfortunately, tragically in that show, like all falls off the rails.
Yeah. But even maybe on a more fundamental level, you go back to David's relationship with his mom. What are they both trying to give each other? They're both trying to give each other hope. She's trying to give him the hope for a better life.
Yeah.
Just because he goes to the school doesn't mean that he's going to have this perfect, but at least it gives him a hope.
They're pursuing the possibility.
Yeah. And at the same time, David doesn't want to go there. He doesn't want that, but I want to give my mom something to hope for.
I want her to be able to see that I was able to accomplish this thing that she wanted for me.
100%. And then that starts the movie, that ends the movie. David wants to give Lucy something to hope for.
Yeah.
Like, fulfill your dream. Go for it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be around. And in a weird way, that also parallels exactly what happened with David's mom wanting to give David hope. She dies. David wants to give Lucy hope. He dies.
Yep.
It's just like you said, it's this train of I want to give hope to the next person, and I'll give up my life to do it.
Yeah. It's like a hope relay where it's like every person is passing it on to the next person, But, in Cyberpunk, it's not a very fun relay. It's just like,
it's a pretty tragic relay.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, it kind of actually, I feel like in a way, if we're looking at hope as this kind of central thematic element, or kind of hope being this invisible, never mentioned MacGuffin that's driving this entire plot going forward. It's like the way that people are willing to sacrifice everything so that another character is able to hold on to hope really shows you how valuable hope is. Is hope more important than life itself? Maybe.
I think a perfect argument for that would be how many people are living currently a life without hope. How many people who are on the downtown east side who are stuck in a perpetual cycle of overdose and knowing that that's going to potentially bring them to death, but they're going to do it anyways because maybe it's not even a lack of hope. That is their only hope. And so regardless of how good or bad your life looks like, you are always seeking the most hopeful thing.
Yeah.
Like hope is the only reason that you go towards anything.
Now, wouldn't that be an interesting way to recontextualize every interaction that you have with a person? When you look at somebody from that outside objective perspective and you say what they're doing is stupid or wrong or doesn't make sense or it's ridiculous, if you start with that default position of the core goal or value in whatever they do is hope, that is the reason for their actions, that might give you the starting point of, so what are they hoping for? What is that hope directed towards? What do they want?
That's a pretty active way to try and engage in a relationship with somebody.
Yeah.
Kind of almost the same way that a good story is one that you have to actively engage your mind with. So
I actually think that's a great way to think about it, right? Like you think about the best relationships, like relationships like we watch in Cyberpunk. Why are they so good? They're active.
Yeah.
Both characters are really engaged in what's happening between the other person. And I think when you look at good relationships that you have between human beings in real life, the worst ones are passive. And not even passive where I'm not doing anything. It's passive a lot of the time in your pursuit of understanding of the other person. Where if it's just, I'm going to receive the information and I'm not going to try to explore, to add more to it from what might not be immediately available. We get such a sparse and incomplete narrative for a person that I think if we're passive, all we have left to do is to fill in the blanks ourselves with assumptions, which usually ends up being the worst result.
And how much of the time are we actually giving the least charitable interpretation to somebody's actions?
Exactly. Well, especially when they seem so ridiculous. If they're so different from us, then it doesn't make sense. I don't have the context for the person. Then I have almost nothing left but to assume that least charitable interpretation. But if you choose to be active in your relationship, like an active audience member in a story, like, oh, I don't want David to do this. Well, that's a contrast. That's a dissonance inside me. Why don't I want David to do this? Why do I think it's wrong? Right? What's the part about him that I care about? Where would I want him to see things be different? Why would I want him to have things be different in his life? And can I engage with in a story? It's a little bit easier because the writers will give you that context as a relationship person. If I would interact with David where he's at, if I had the opportunity to, a weird thing to think about, but imagining David partway through that show coming to see me as a therapist, like, what would I start to ask him about? Part of why there's like a cliche that therapists will ask you about, well, what happened when you were a child? What was your relationship with your parents like? And it's because that's what gives us the context for original hurt. And so if I was going to be sitting down with David and I'm watching him go through this cyberization process that he can't stop and he continues to go through cyberpsychosis, it's like, why are you doing this? I'm going to ask him about what his drives and motivations are. What is it that you're not going to be able to do without continuing to get new cyberizations, right? Well, I need to be stronger. I need to protect the people around me. I need to take care of these people. Why are you gunning for all this money? I want to be able to send Lucy to the moon. Why is it so important for you to send her to the moon? And we'd probably come all the way back to my mom tried to give me something and I couldn't do it, or we lost it, or I lost her, or whatever David's particular experience of hurt is in that original relationship. And so then, okay, this is what's driving this. This is what you're hoping to change, right? And it's again, you look at emotions animated on a character's face. That moment where he breaks out of cyberpsychosis at the very end before he dies, when he's saving Lucy, like, he looks happy. Why? He finally achieved his goal. The thing that he was hoping for came to fruition. Doesn't matter that he's like dying now and he's going to go through cyberpsychosis. The end's inevitable. He's like, oh, I did it. Right? And if we started to engage with other human beings in our life in the same way that if we are active audience members, we engage with a character like David, I think lots of our interactions would be different. Lots of the ways that we feel about other people would be different. The ways that we relate and act towards each other would be dramatically transformed. Totally. Because we often don't, I don't know how I want to frame this. It's like we don't give each other the courtesy, or we don't give each other the justice or the dignity of being active participants in relationship.
You asking questions, imagining that David came to you in episode 6 with all these questions.
Yeah.
You asking those questions is like going back to episode 1.
Yeah.
And gaining
exactly.
context.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe that's the key then, is that good relationships are ones where you engage with somebody to try and figure out their episode 1.
Yeah. I love that. What is episode 1? Where did this story start for you?
Yeah. Guys, that's all the time, unfortunately, we have for today. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, and definitely comment below. Are there any movies or TV shows or any even pieces of social media content or individuals, influencers, channels that you want us to touch on and maybe bring up in a future episode?
Yeah. Tell us if you guys had an experience where you discovered somebody's episode 1 and how that changed the relationship you had with them.
I'll love it. All right. Take care.
See you guys.